Okay, good morning. Welcome to this joint event between the European Policy Centre and the Konrad-Adenauer-Stiftung. We will be looking towards inclusive, sustainable and digital transitions, the role of the Recovery and Resilience Facility, and we'll be exploring how economic recovery post-COVID can contribute to the success of the sustainable and digital transitions. In particular, we'll look at the role of the Recovery and Resilience Facility, which will provide funding to member states for investments and reforms over the next few years. Indeed, it will represent an unprecedented opportunity to mobilize large amounts of finance for future-proofing the EU's economy. Shocks and structural changes have the potential to exacerbate disparities and disproportionately affect the most vulnerable. This has been clearly demonstrated by the pandemic, and the twin transitions carry the risk of doing the same. Acknowledging and addressing these risks will be crucial for making a success of the twin transitions. This event is part of the joint EPC Konrad-Adenauer-Stiftung project National Recovery Resilience Plans, Enablers of the Twin Transformations, and accompanies the publication of the project's final discussion paper, a link to which can be found in the chat box. So in the week of the not so strict deadline for the submission of the National Recovery and Resilience Plans, but certainly as member states begin to submit their documents for assessment, we will take the opportunity to discuss the planning implementation of the reforms and investments, the potential negative distributional effects and how to address them, and where we go from here. I'm Laura Rayner. I'm a policy analyst for the EPC, working on the Social Europe and Wellbeing Programme. I'm joined today by Dr. Hardy Ostry, who's head of the European office of the Konrad-Adenauer-Stiftung, and he'll give some opening remarks. We'll follow this with a panel discussion with Céline Gauer, who's head of the European Commission's Recovery and Resilience Task Force, Markus Ferber, MEP, who is a German member for the Christian Social Union, a member of the Econ Committee in the Parliament, and vice chair of the Parliament's Subcommittee on Tax Matters. Markus Cilento, who's head of the Institutional Policy of the European Trade Union Confederation, James Watson, Chief Economist for BusinessEurope, and my colleague Marta, Pilati, EPC Policy Analyst working on Europe's political economy. The event is an interactive one, so please do write your questions in the Q&A box as they occur to you, and I'll try and bring them into the discussion as and when appropriate. It's not my intention to have a specific Q&A section at the end, so please don't wait for an opportunity at the end of the meeting to ask your questions. Please do bring them in as and when they occur to you. And certainly if you're not feeling too shy this morning, you're very welcome to raise your hand and we can give you the floor so you can ask your question verbally. The plan for the meeting is that I hope, if time allows, to begin our discussions with some overarching questions, then look at the drafting of the RRPs, explore the content to the degree that we can, and then have a look at issues related to implementation, monitoring, plus finally some wider questions on further reforms that may be necessary. I should mention now that Mr. Ferber has to leave us at 12 due to commitments in the Parliament, and so if you have any questions that you want to direct to him, then please keep that time in mind. So to start properly, I'll hand the floor to Dr. Ostry to give his opening comments.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, on behalf of the European office of the Konrad-Adenauer-Stiftung, also warm welcome to our joint event by KAS and EPC. A historic step for Europe, or an unprecedented sign of solidarity. The Recovery Resilience Facility has been called many things, but faced with a threat as historic as the pandemic, a historic response and a unique sign of solidarity, as Chancellor Merkel pointed out, was clearly necessary. However, the correct implementation of the facility and the appropriate spending of its funds still constitutes an enormous challenge, and one which will require innovative strategic planning. The importance of recognizing the differences between the political, economical, and social challenges faced by each single member state is something we at Konrad-Adenauer-Stiftung are keenly aware of. Analyzing the different approaches taken in the member states, as well as their contributions toward the EU transition for a more sustainable and digital economy, also known as twin transition, therefore is priority for us. Together with our partner, the European Policy Centre, whom I would like to thank for their cooperation in the project and their noteworthy report, we concentrated on 5 specific examples and began an in-depth analysis of their respective recovery and resilience plans. Today, as the, let's say, official deadline to submit these plans to the Commission is only days away, we will discuss how the member states are planning to use the funds they will receive from the facility, how they should ideally be used to make the twin transitions possible, and how the private sector can be involved in this process. Thankfully, our panel today is well suited to tackle all these important questions, and I'm looking forward to have an interesting in-depth discussion. Thank you all for joining us.
Thank you, Dr. Ostry. So just to open the discussion then, just a question to all of the speakers. So the COVID-19 pandemic has exacerbated inequalities in society. And indeed, as I mentioned before, the twin transitions have the potential to do the same. Do you believe that the RRPs will tackle these in a meaningful way? Perhaps, Céline, you can begin.
Thank you very much, Laura, and thank you very much for the kind invitation to join you this morning. It's a very, very busy period for us, but it's always interesting to have an outside look to what we're doing. So to answer your question directly, yes, I really believe that the plans will allow us to tackle these inequalities, and this for 2 reasons. First, because the framework for the plans is the right one. So the framework for the plan is really starting from the identification of the needed reforms based on the European semester. So what we call the CSRs, the country-specific recommendations, that have, if you look at them in detail, a very strong social and inclusion component. We have year after year seen reforms relating to the labor market, and in particular to the inclusion in the labor market of the most vulnerable. We have lots of recommendations concerning education or social safety nets. And the member states have an obligation to address a significant subset of relevant country-specific recommendations. So already from the setup, the plans are meant to have a very strong social and cohesion dimension. Second, the regulation also obliges member states to explain how the plans contribute to gender equality, but more generally to equal opportunities for all, and how they will mainstream in the plans those objectives. And that, you could say, is not a requirement, it's just an obligation to explain. But because of this obligation to explain, it has facilitated greatly the debate with the member states on those dimensions. And that's the second point. I'm optimistic because of what I see in the plans. We don't have the full picture yet, only a few submissions have come in, but we have a good idea of what's in there. And we see a very strong social dimension in actually all of the plans. Roughly a third of the expenditure is directly related to social. And that takes various forms that are really very much tailor-made to the needs of the member states. So you have a lot directed to health, but not only building new hospitals and improving the infrastructure, but also improving accessibility to the healthcare and looking at primary care, which is essential for general accessibility of people. Education, you have a lot of measures really focusing on the children that have suffered the most from the pandemic to avoid that the inequalities of today are essentially reduced in the future. And finally, the typical social safety net recommendation that we had, in particular for some member states in Eastern Europe, this negotiation of the RRP provided us a very good basis to address this. So overall, yes, I'm very, very positive and very optimistic in that. And we will have to report on this. I think we are developing a social methodology to report on the social expenditure. So yearly, you will see the progress in the implementation. Thank you.
Thank you. Markus, maybe you can go next.
Yeah, thank you very much. And it's a pleasure for me being invited by Konrad-Adenauer Foundation, as I'm the chairman of the Hans Seidel Foundation. And as we are sister parties, we are, of course, sister foundations as well. So I hope we can continue our good cooperation. I think it is certainly the ambition of Next Generation EU and the Recovery and Resilience Facility to overcome the economic and social challenges presented by the COVID-19 pandemic and to set Europe up for a more prosperous future. And I think it is a common goal which has even been addressed by Céline as well. To achieve that and to overcome the inequalities induced by the crisis, we need to achieve long-term sustainable growth. Economic growth and the wealth creation that comes with it provides the tools to deal with inequalities. Those are certainly lofty goals, and the implementation and scrutiny of the program will decide if we achieve those goals and really deliver for the next generation, because we want really to deliver for the next generation and not that the next generation has to pay for that. I think that is the main challenge. The alternative would be that Next Generation EU ends up being a very expensive expenditure program with little value added. And I hope Commission is proving that seriously. And as we have established in the Parliament, a working group who deals with this issue as well, and I'm a member of this working group, we will take a look on that very seriously as well. And we have already started our work. Instead of structural reforms and smart productive investments that boost the long-term output potential of the economy, we too often see that governments just repackage their expensive pet projects to give them a European look. And even if I had a chance to look through German and French proposal from yesterday and the Italian from the day before, I'm not yet convinced that that is not done in that way by those. Those investments often are neither additional nor they are growth enhancing. And I think that is something we should really take care and have a look on. We should be very clear, though, for member states that suffer from a combination of structurally weak growth and high public debt, the recovery fund is a once-in-a-generation opportunity to get back in track, and it should be used like that. Take one like Italy that even before the pandemic had not grown for a decade. If such a country receives a 200 billion euro injection, spends the money wisely, and at the same time implements structural reforms, it would be lifted to an entirely new growth trajectory, which will boost other member states additionally. So that is the challenge we are confronted with. The difference between making the most out of a golden opportunity and wasting the chance of a lifetime is that the European Commission and the European Parliament fulfill their obligation according to the regulation. And that is what we will work together in the weeks to come. I think, therefore, the Commission has to do a scrutiny in a similar way as it did with the fiscal rules. And no, it should not do like with the fiscal rules, sorry. Where it shielded away from conflicts with member states and settled for compromises that at the end helped no one, then I think if it will be like that, we will have a problem. So I can assure you that, especially me, I cannot speak for the whole Parliament, we will keep monitoring both the scrutiny and the eventual implementation of the plans. While we cannot veto any plan, I can guarantee you that we will make our voices heard if we have concerns. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Maybe to James next.
Sorry, I'm here. Okay, sorry about that. I thought I was going to come a bit later. Look, I mean, the first point, I think on your question, it's a significant amount of money we're talking about. So it certainly can play a role, I think, in aiding those twin transitions and as a consequence, really addressing some of the inequality issues and in particular, I think, ensuring opportunity for all. And it's important, as MEP Ferber just said, that we scrutinise how that money is spent and make sure that we don't waste this opportunity. But I think it's also important to look at the numbers in context. I think McKinsey estimate that the green transition bringing us to the 2050 carbon target is going to require 28 trillion in investment. So that's 700 billion in investment by the private sector every year for the next 3 decades. So the crucial thing, I think, is what the representative of the Commission talked about at the start, which is the need, I think, for this investment both to be well spent and, in particular, to be accompanied by the right reforms. So there was a mention of labour market reforms, very important if we're going to ensure an inclusive transition and bring more people into the labour market. That's a job is the best way of reducing poverty, I think. And similarly, as I say, we need to make much more progress in improving the attractiveness of the European environment for business investment. If you look, for example, at the World Bank indicators, the ease of doing business, there's still much more we can do in terms of improving the business environment in many member states in the EU. So I do hope that, as Mr. Ferber said, that the Commission and then the Council will be tough in making sure that these reform programs are well thought through, that they have exacting reforms, and in Business Europe we also plan to play our role in that work as well. But that's going to be very important.
Maybe we'll move to Marco if you'd like to comment.
Voilà. Thank you for the invitation. First of all, as the European Trade Union Confederation, representing 45 million workers in Europe, I would like to say from the beginning that we have welcomed the Recovery Resilience Facility, the Next Generation EU in general, and I think it goes in the right direction. Of course, now we are into an implementation stage. So once we have adopted the framework and now we are going to implementing, we want to be sure that the implementation can really achieve the objectives that we consider more useful for Europe and for the single member states. So, and here we have also many concerns. Our approach to these instruments has been very constructive in its implementation from the beginning. We have produced at the very early stage reports where country by country we are identifying the priorities that in our view had to be addressed. We also have proposed a model based on the SDGs to evaluate the impact. In fact, all our inputs refer to the 3 dimensions of the sustainability agenda, and in particular in the social side, we refer to the European Pillar of Social Rights. And I think that this the contribution we wanted to give. We are preparing now a new report on the involvement of the social partners and the critical points of the national plans, and hopefully I hope we will have the chance to discuss it either with the Commission, probably with Gauer and the team if they are interested, and of course with also our social partners. We also made a country desk meetings, bilateral meetings between national unions and the country desk at the Commission, in particular in DG Employment and DG ECFIN, that result to be very valuable. So we have a clear overview of what is happening. And I have to tell that's just to come to your point very straightforward because the time is very short. We have some concerns at this moment. And one is the fact that the social reforms are interpreted by some forces, including the European Commission and some governments, in an old-fashioned way. And I refer in particular to pensions reforms, to how to address the segmentation of the labor market, which cannot be addressed by depriving or to reducing the level of rights to create the level playing field, but to try to have an upward convergence inspired by the best practice. In Europe, we have a big issue on wage. There are countries that are in a wage trap, especially Eastern countries, and some other countries that have suffered a lot from the previous crisis. And this, I see there are some different ways to see how to solve it, in particularly on the role that collective bargaining can play. Especially on the collective bargaining structures, I think that any kind of interference from the model of a collective bargaining that the member states with the social partners are designing as the best and the more suitable for that specific context, this choice must always be respected, because the collective bargaining structures are at the origins of the fair distributions, together with social transfers, and I think it's really crucial for fighting inequalities to have sound collective bargaining structures. I have another little concerns on the fact that reading the debates on the national plans, I have the impression that the digital and green are remaining a bit aside, even if they are the main objectives of the national plans. Discussion at national level cannot really catch the relevance of the transformation that this plan is going to make. And probably also this would be detrimental to the identification of the just transition measures. Not only the regional one, because, okay, the just transition fund can address the issues in those regions that will suffer more, but this is something that will cut across all the societies and workers. And in my view, this debate can be reinforced if we want to avoid inequalities. If I may, my last remark, if I have another couple of minutes, is to underline that I agree with the issue of growth, but I think with Business Europe and the other employers, we have together expressed well how growth and good economic and entrepreneurship environments can lead also to social progress. I will not insist on this. I just want to say that with our metrics to evaluate the impact of the RRF using a set of indicators based on the SDGs, we show very clearly that if we invest on decent work and sustainable growth, you can push up the digital agenda, especially in countries where the labor-related performances are very low, where the human capital is very poorly developed. If you invest in that part, you will immediately have, and I can show with data and evidences, that we will have an immediate push on the digital skills of people and the digitalization in general of the economy. I think this is underestimated. This is a big findings that we have found, and we are insisting a lot. Invest on quality jobs to have to put the technology at the center of the process for productivity and all the things that may arise. I would stop here. Probably on the involvement of social partners, I can come back later on.
Yeah, I think we'll come back to an awful lot of these topics throughout anyway. Marta, to you.
Thank you, Laura, and let me thanks again our project partners, CAS, who made this project possible. And I want to also mention again that there is a discussion paper that has been produced in the context of this project, and that you can find the link to that in the chat box. I'll take a broader perspective and make 2 points, one on the transitions and one on the Recovery and Resilience Facility. My first point is a bit general, is that structural changes create winners and losers. And this is the case for all of them, including the green and digital transitions. Clearly, these transitions are crucial to fight climate change and to create a new model for prosperity, like we've been saying. So their success is essential, but for their success, everyone needs to be on board. We are talking about, with the transitions, we're talking about adaptations in the production processes, public administration services, education, labor market, skill-based energy mix, infrastructure, and much more. Not everyone in the EU is at the same level regarding these changes, and thus these transitions will require different levels of effort. And usually it's those that are already vulnerable that will need to take the longest leap forward. And this is visible from a social perspective. For example, the impacts of technological change on the labor market are stronger on low-skilled workers. We can also see that gender dimensional technological change, which might exclude women from benefits. But it's also visible from a geographical perspective, with areas and regions that have strong concentrations, for example, of industrial sectors that will disappear or deeply change. These areas might suffer from localized effects on the labor market. Similarly, areas with lower skill bases might struggle to adapt to new job profiles that demand higher skills. I want to make an important point, is that acknowledging this inequality risks is not meant to undermine the need for the twin transitions. Rather, it's quite the opposite. It's crucial to ensure that they're successful. I think social and territorial cohesion will be the key determinant of the success or failure of the twin transitions, and correspondingly, the Recovery and Resilience Facility. So I come to my second point. The reforms and investments of the facility must be well thought and envisage a comprehensive framework that ensures that secondary effects, indirect effects are accounted for. I'll just make two examples. Digitalization of public services, for example, might reduce the access of those that have limited digital skills and digital infrastructure. So it should be gradual, and it should be coupled with education, awareness campaign, and infrastructure development. Otherwise, it will lead to social exclusion for some groups. Similarly, reforms and investments in the education labor market, they should be carefully aligned. Incentives, for example, to digitalize companies' productive processes will be useless if the available workforce doesn't have the necessary skills to work with these innovations. So it's crucial to develop those aligned with a redesign of education and workforce training. And the reverse is also true. If you invest in education without ensuring that the labor market provides an adequate offer of high-skill occupations, then that investment on education will be lost because of brain drain or overqualification. So my main point is that it's crucial to ensure that the interactions of measures included in the recovery plans are well thought, they're accounted for, also their indirect effects. And this is what will make the transitions successful or not. I'll stop here. Thanks, Laura.
Thank you. Apologies for my daughter wandering around in the background. She has a cough and a fever, so she's at home. So yeah, I would just wonder, if, leading on from Marta's comments in particular, actually, whether, Céline, you would be able to give us an idea of how member states are planning to implement the sustainable digital investments and structural reforms through the facility. You know, I realize that the plans are starting to come in now, but bearing in mind the dialogue that's been going on for the last 6 months or so.
Thank you very much, Laura. And indeed, I think the presence of reform in the plan is one of the key points that was debated in the setup of the facility, and now it's in its implementation. What we see in the plan are actually two different types of reform. We see quite significant structural reforms that are proposed by member states. They don't have an obligation to address each and every country-specific recommendation and each and every recommendation for structural reforms that they have received in the last years, but a significant subset of them. But what we see is that in line with their particular challenges, they are doing so. And there are also in the chat a number of references to pension reforms as emblematic. So you will see a number of pension reforms in a number of plans in those member states where the sustainability issue was the greatest, and the need for movement was the greatest. But you will also see a number of other types of measures linked to the labor market that actually have a pretty direct impact on the sustainability of pension regimes as well. So we shouldn't really look at one simple type of reform and then focus on it. We should really look at how you achieve the objectives, what is the need for the member state, and what is the best way, in full respect of the national ownership, to get there. And here I think what we see is quite good. And then we see the second type of reform that Marta was more referring to, which is linked to the investments themselves. And within the design of the digital and green investment, we have the necessary reforms that are inbuilt. For example, for digitalization, you have a lot of digitalization of justice or digitalization of government, with a view in particular to facilitate business and improve the business environment. That, as James was recalling, is very crucial in a number of our member states. But there's no point in digitalizing if you haven't first looked at what you are digitalizing and how you can make those processes, for example, those justice processes, those government authorization processes, leaner and smoother and swifter, because otherwise you simply digitalize bureaucracy. And that's why just only one example of things where you have inside the reform components very strong reform elements. Thank you.
That would lead me on quite nicely to another question for James. I wonder whether you could give an idea of what the priority areas of intervention to ensure private sector support and engagement through the transitions.
Well, I mean, firstly, in terms of engagement in the process so far, I think it's been a little bit of a mixed bag. I think certainly in some member states, our federations have very much been involved in development of the plan. In some member states that have liked to have seen more involvement. Obviously, I think we've also been stressing that it's important that the plans are developed, that we move forward at a pace here and make sure the investments take place as soon as possible, so that they don't become counter-cyclical. On the other side of your question, oh, sorry, could you just repeat? Sorry.
Yeah, it's looking at what the priority areas of intervention would be.
Well, I think in terms of the priorities, I think we recognise that digitalisation and the green transition obviously very, very important. But I think we'd also say we mustn't be exclusive about that. You know, try and be market based. Try and put the money, you know, where the, you know, alongside where the market would expect to see it, using market mechanisms such as through the EIB. So we don't want to be exclusive, and we want to make sure that, you know, we cover those areas, but as well we touch on other things that may be important for future competitiveness.
I'll come to Marco next. Just in that, building on what James has just mentioned in terms of the inclusion of voices within the drafting process, I wonder if you can give an assessment of how you've found the inclusion of trade union voices and others in the process. Indeed, we've had a question from Anna Kreuzer, who's asked what the Commission thinks of civil society's involvement in the formulation of the RRPs, because indeed there seems to be, as James said, a bit of a mixed bag. So I just wonder if you could have a mention on that.
As you can imagine, the situation in Europe is quite variegated. Say, what it worked is that from the very beginning, I have to recognize the Commission insists on the need to involve the social partners, especially from the guidelines published in September, and then in the RRF, we have been able to, the regulation, we have been able to maintain this reference. I have to say that in many countries, compared to the semester experience, governments have called the member state, the social partners, somehow to talk to them. There are still some countries where stubbornly the governments don't want to talk to social partners, like in Austria, for instance, even if there is a long tradition of social dialogue, we have some other experience. The problem here is not the fact that sometimes the government have sent a document or pick up the phone or organize a real consultation. The problem is the quality of the consultation now that we are trying to address. Many member states, our members in many member states have said that the consultation was only formal. We have a permanent monitoring on this, and some good experience like France, also in Bulgaria, surprisingly. But some other times is really the problem is to make the message going through. For instance, one example is the one that Madame Gauer was mentioning is on pensions. Here, really, we cannot understand each other. We come from a period where we have said to people, to elderly people, they were a cost of aging, and the policies were reflecting the fact that the people were considered only as a cost. And these reforms, in reality, now we want to do it as an approach of dignity of aging, being aware that the public expenditure and the system pensions have to reflect the fact that there will be more elderly people, and probably we need a different kind of public expenditure. And this passage is not able to be done. And this is a sort of non-mutual understanding between the policymakers that are implementing the RRF and the social partners. I can make also other example where even if we have country-specific recommendation in a different direction in 2019 and 2020, and recommendation on access to social protection, still we cannot find a common ground to understand on how to address this specific problem. And we have offered many solutions, but just to give an example of how the quality of dialogue can be improved on a very concrete stuff, but there are many other examples that can be done.
Thank you. Markus, I was wondering, indeed, building on that perhaps maybe the quality of consultation then, if it's not that the consultation's happening, it's just perhaps the quality of it that's the issue. Maybe this is to do with the time scale. In the end, this is a massive project happening in a very short period of time, actually. I wonder if you feel that perhaps the limited time is actually a potentially limiting the ambition of some of the reforms, the plans overall.
Oh, good to get that question, because till now I was always asked why Europe is so lacking delivering the money. And we have to wait till all 27 member states have signed the financial regulation and the own resources requirements, which we have a new challenge coming from Finland at the moment, where there's a 2/3 majority needed in the parliament. And the Commission only can go to the capital markets after all 27 member states have ratified the own resources decision. So that's 1 year after probably 1 year after the first decision of this next generation EU program on head of state level. And normally the accusing is, why does Europe need so much time to deliver? Yeah, because we are now in the crisis and money is now needed, not in 2, 3, 4 years time. So thanks for this question, to put it the other way around. But I wanted to address that because it was clear that after we have agreed on a legal base what has to be done by member states, of course a lot of work had to be done in all member states to deliver in proper time, and the time is coming to an end at the end of this week. As till end of April we should get all the RRF national plans. So we will see how that works. And I saw very interesting reactions in different member states. I'm really a fan of the Greek approach. I have not seen the final Greek program, but the approach to give it to someone to have a look from outside, not asking all ministries, what do you have in your desk, on your desk, which you would always do, but there was no money available, but really to look, to say, have a look on Greece, what is needed in Greece to address digital transformation, to address Green Deal and sustainable growth, and start from almost nothing, and we will check it afterwards how it fits with our national programs. I found that is really an approach which makes sense, really to use this tool, as I said in my first statement, for doing that what couldn't be done till now, and not to finance what was already planned to be done. So therefore, of course, the time was short and a lot of obligations, but I think the discussions between Commission and Member States have been very helpful and fruitful, and we will see whether these fruits have grown in the right way and are sweet enough that at the end Commission and Parliament are able to eat it, and they deliver then the services for the people in the member states, because that is what we always have to have in mind. We are not serving the states, we are serving the people.
I wonder, potentially, Céline, is there a risk that because of the target set for climate and digital within the RRF, is there a risk that we're going to see member states putting all of their sort of intended or planned reforms related to these topics within the RRF? They're of course spending the money on all of the non-green, non-digital things from their own budgets. I mean, is the end point exactly the same as where we started, in that the money is just being used for the same projects? It just is coming from different pots. Is that something that's a real risk?
Thanks a lot. Well, I don't think so, because for some member states and many member states actually, this envelope makes a huge difference, and it is additional possibilities to invest that they would otherwise not have had. And this is in particular true for the member states that have the most difficulties to meet the 2050 target of being carbon neutral that was mentioned before. And very often in the debate with those member states, we hear, yeah, it's a good objective, but we don't have the means. It's very, very hard for us to invest so much. And here, essentially, by this focus on green, with the 37% expenditure going to climate, we are providing them with a possibility to make at least some of the investment. It's true, it's not going to bridge everything and to fill the gap for investment. It will actually go in a good direction. So it is also true, I think that was mentioned before, lack of additionality. It's true that those plans have to be plans that will deliver in a very short period of time, because no money will be spent after 2026. So by nature, the investments have to be ripe, have to be mature. And in particular, if you think about investment in infrastructure, if you start thinking about why not building offshore wind, an offshore wind park at some point somewhere, if you start thinking about it now, it's already too late for having it in place in the right time frame. So of course we see actually advancing and realizing plans that would otherwise, without the facility, simply not take up, because investment budget would have been cut as a follow-up to the economic crisis, as we saw before. So no, I think we will see a very significant difference and very significant push towards the green transition. And maybe, if I may, a last word still back on the social dialogue. It is true. It is. We have seen a lot of engagement in some member states, a bit less in some others. We have constantly pushed for it. But what is really important is that this is not the end. The adoption of the plan is not the end of that social dialogue. And for all of the measures that have a particular relevance, for example, for the trade unions, what we see is that the way the milestones have been designed for those reforms, they do include social dialogue as part of the delivery. So you have the objective of the reform that is there in a plan, the timeline of the reform, but you have the space and the flexibility for the social dialogue for refining the measure. So it was just an important message. It's not the end of it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I come in, Laura, on a few of these points?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think Céline. So I mean, on the first point, a member state simply going to shift money that they would have spent into their broader budget. I mean, I think that is an important point. I know Marta's raised it in her report that's out today. As Céline said, I think in some member states, the fund, if you like, the plan will be a large proportion of their overall investment spending, so there'll be less scope for doing that. But I think if you look at some member states, so we saw, for example, France and Germany yesterday, you know, I mean, I think it's been well reported. France has got an overall recovery plan of about 100 billion, and 40 billion of that is through the EU side. There's clearly quite a lot of scope for shifting things around. It's even bigger in Germany, by the way. I think the overall recovery plan, what was announced last spring, is near 200 billion. As opposed to 2025 for the EU. So I think that the scope for that is going to vary between member states. I think it's important we have a mature debate about this. Perhaps we shouldn't be shouting so much that this is due to Europe, but we to have a mature debate and that it's going to happen. The important thing, I think, is that we continue, at least in the member state, to scrutinise every part of that member state's expenditure, and that will be done, on our level by the national business federations. But that needs to continue. Just on a couple of other points, and I think on this point about the what sort of projects and new projects and such like. I mean, I think it's great that sometimes you can look at issues with new eyes, as perhaps they've done in Greece, to have a new commission. Of course, I mean, unfortunately, Greece hasn't been able to do a great deal of investment spending during the last 5 years, so they perhaps didn't have those shovel-ready projects ready. But I'm a former civil servant. I'd also suggest, as I think Céline did, it's important as well that when you have done work to look into the sorts of projects that you could take forward, when they've not been taken forward because that there wasn't the money there or the hurdle rate hadn't been met. When detailed work has been done, it's that's perfectly legitimate as well that we take forward those projects and use this opportunity. So it could be a combination of the two. I did have one other point I'm trying to remember. I'll leave it there for now, though.
Marta, you wanted to respond?
Yes, just thanks. Just a very quick point on the issue of timing. I think the recovery facility has been caught in the middle of a double fire, because it has been somewhat sold as an immediate response, fiscal stimulus to respond to the crisis, but in fact that's not really true. It's a medium-term financing mechanism for structural reforms, which is very much needed, and the timing is right. But on the one hand, it's coming a bit too late to really be an immediate response, which is what instead has been done by the member states themselves, with other fiscal measures and other things, the central bank anyway. And then it's coming, it's a very tight timing to really design structural strategies for long-term change. So it has a bit this double tension of being too late for something and too soon for something else. But I think there has been some sort of balance in between these, and the timing is right. And I think what the Commission and the member states have done in these past months, it's been an enormous amount of work to come in just 4 or 5 months to come up with such a comprehensive plans, with even if there are faults, that some things have still to be worked out. But still, this is you know, I'm very impressed by all the work that has been done. And I think the plans, looking at the drafts list, which is what we've been doing in this project, they're quite comprehensive. They look at different things. Of course, there can be improved, and I look forward to seeing the Commission's assessment. But still, I mean, I think we shouldn't underestimate the scale of the work that was required to put these plans together. And I think, of course, as has been mentioned, additionality it is very important. But I also think that it might be best to finance a project that was already there, but you know, didn't have the money, but it's a well-thought project that has been planned a few years ago, because it's still aligned with the objectives, for example, of the green transition. That's still better than a new project that has been put together in 3 months this year, and that has no, you know, it makes no sense and might have limited impact. So I think we should, you know, yeah, be careful about what we wanted to expect from these plans as well. Thanks.
I mean, I wonder, moving slightly forward, just because of the way that the discussion's gone, I wonder in terms of implementation and monitoring, Markus, maybe you can comment on the role of the Parliament in this. I know you mentioned in your opening remarks about the working group of the Parliament to assess the plans. You know, are you going to be an ally to the Commission in this process, or are you arch enemies here? Are you just another hurdle to overcome?
We are both, I think. Of course, we want to cooperate with Commission, as Commission has to do the first assessment. But we are still in negotiations which documents we will get at which time. Because if you look to the legislation itself, it says that the competent committees have to be informed, but as according to our standing, it's 2 committees, Budget and Econ. We built this working group consisting out of 25 members from all political groups from these 2 committees, as we will have to respond very quickly. There's only a 2-month period. So therefore we can't do it with our normal procedures. And so we are an ally for everyone, member states and Commission, and the hurdle as well. We have to play our role as Parliament. And of course, we have introduced a lot of things in the legislation. Number 1 are the 6 priorities, which have been invented by the European Parliament. Of course, we will check how these 6 priorities are covered. And number 2 is, of course, which is very important, what has been done or what has happened in relation to reforms. I mentioned that very clearly, and that is an issue for the Parliament, as we don't want only a new financial source for existing programs. I said it very clearly, and that is really a big point for the Parliament. Of course, we have to double check how plans are interfering to other plans. So if you look, for example, to the tax reduction in France, what does it mean for the neighbors? Yeah, it's really something we have to have a look on, and I hope Commission is assessing that as well, because you can't take France as a single piece. You really have to look, what does it mean for the neighborhood, and will be there growth in France because of this tax reduction, which creates a loss of jobs in the neighborhood. Germany, in Belgium, even in Luxembourg, I don't know, or Spain and Italy. So we will see, and we have to check these things as well, because we want to have a European added value coming out of this program that is difficult to estimate, but it has to be checked via these plans. Therefore, we are at the moment inventing a kind of matrix, which then should be filled in with the data available from the Commission to have with a short view, a first assessment. And answering your question, yes, we are in cooperation with the Commission, as they are providing us with all the informations and their assessments. We don't want to be a hurdle, we only want to be a gatekeeper in the best sense, to take care that the legal obligations are covered by all 27 national recovery plans.
Thank you. Marco, do you want to respond?
If I may say something on this point, because when we have seen this huge amount of money arriving, and especially in countries that are benefiting more, this creates havoc among the political forces. I say this because for me, reinforcing the institutions, the democratic institution, is one of the points of the recovery plan in general. Because when we have created all this huge amount of people, we have seen in the country I come from, Italy, is probably most evident, but also in other countries, that's all this arrival of money has created a lot of frictions and tensions between the political forces. Governments fail, etc., and the implementation will be the same. There is a huge risk that a big interest will capture the national plans and the resources, and that is also why creating more democratic processes, opening to civil society, social parties, is crucial. Also, when the assessment of the plans will arrive to the Parliament and the Commission, in particular, I think that these two institutions should be the guarantor of the European added value of the entire plan. Surely for the Commission having a strong role on this, and I hope that also the Parliament will operate not as an extension of national interest, but maintaining the European added value and interest. I think this is crucial. Until now, we had very good signs. The only the Parliament have exercised a very important role in improving the design of the recovery plan. But by the experience we have at European level, when then we start deciding how to spend the money, it's these things may change. So we are quite active also in operating with all the political groups, at least of the democratic rainbow, let's say, inside the European Parliament, for make this happening. For us, this is an institutional side, but it's also very important.
I'll give the floor to Helmut von Glasenapp. He has said that he has a question regarding the timing and the ongoing discussions about the contents of the plans. And indeed, it was my next question too. There's an awful lot in the press at the moment about, well, suggestions on quicker timing and so on. So Helmut, the floor is yours.
So I hope you can hear me.
Yes.
I'm representing the national promotional banks and institutions all over Europe. And our members have implemented support measures as of April 2020. So very fast, much easier than the RRF. That's very clear. But timing was our big concern at that time. And our members did it on behalf of national governments. And again, it is much easier to decide on national level as it is at European level. However, listening to your discussion, I asked myself whether we are discussing too much resilience, which is very important with this amount of money, and whether we should not also look on recovery. The first R, I think this is important. What we hear from our members from the markets is that for the service sectors, I picked just the example of tourism, which has suffered a lot. The summer season has been prepared. So if the money will come in July, it's done. This season is done. So the recovery for this will be in 2022 only. And here I think we should look first of all on the timing, and I don't know how we manage it in this complex structure to be fast. And one last remark, as a European, I think the European answer to the pandemic was three elements. The one was what the European Central Bank is doing. I think I don't follow in detail, but this is working. we had the European Guarantee Fund, to which not all member states gave their okay, and we have also some implementing problems on a midterm basis. So for the moment, we can finance only projects from the European Guarantee Fund until the end of 2021. And then there is the RRF, and I think there is a high responsibility of the European institutions that European citizens see a European answer which is working. And I think here timing is really important. What do you think about the recovery and the timing for the recovery? Thanks.
Laura, if you allow, as I have to leave afterwards, because that is a very important point which has been raised. Of course, at the moment, member states invested a lot of money to finance those sectors which have been locked down or shut down by the member states itself. And tourism is a very crucial issue, as you are dependent even from your neighbors. So if all Italians make holidays in Italy, the hotels will not be fully used, and the same goes for all the other touristic destinations. So we really have to organize cross-border. That's why today or during we have started our discussion. We had the discussion in the plenary of the European Parliament about this green pass, how to make travel cross-border inside European Union possible, especially for summer, because otherwise we will lose tourism, we will lose the whole culture sector, theaters, cinemas, all this stuff, which is closed now for more than a year. So tourism was open last year during summer break, but had to close down again. Culture was never opened, which is a crucial thing as well. And we see a lot of small businesses with challenges. And to address that with the recovery plans is very difficult, because one can say, wow, 200 billion for Italy. Is the administration able to deal with this huge amount in microfinancing? And that is one of the main challenges, of course. It will not, no administration, I'm not blaming Italy, no administration in the European Union can introduce programs with such a huge amount for micro entities. And therefore, these recovery plans have to address a main path where at the end others will benefit without being addressed directly. And that is one of the key challenges. And tourism is a key factor for that, as we have a lot of member states where more than 20% of GDP comes out of tourism. Even Austria has these figures, and maybe not be the most classical destination for summer breaks. So therefore, that's really a crucial element, and promotional banks have played a very important role now in to bring all these national programs to the small, medium-sized enterprises, and will continue to play this very important role. And I'm very happy that we have these promotional banks all over Europe. And the EIB delivers a huge service as well. So sorry, I have to leave now because I have to speak in the plenary about digital taxation, which is another important issue as well. Okay, take care, bye-bye.
Thank you, Markus. Céline, I wonder, if you want to come back, indeed, we have a question from the audience as well, from Alex Praley. Would you be able to explain process-wise what will happen if the plans are submitted? And I think it's likely that at least some of them will be submitted after the 30th of April.
Thank you very much. Yes, some remarks on timing, and maybe starting with the framing of the question. So we are talking about the urgent need for some sectors like the tourism or the cultural sector, but we should not mix crisis response and recovery plans. The recovery, the RRF, is not a crisis management tool. So we've had at EU level a number of instruments immediately at the beginning of the pandemic, and we continue using them, managing crisis response. This is REACT-EU, this is the support to a short-time work scheme for people affected by containment measures. This is also the mobilization of the structural funds that we have allowed with a lot of flexibility to cater for the management of the crisis. But that is different from the RF, and the RF is not then aiming at managing the crisis. Second, in terms of the urgency, I think that the interest rate, thanks to the central bank, are extremely low. So there is no problem for the moment for the member states to finance the spending that is needed. So yes, this money has to go to the member states, but there is no big drama whether it comes a week or a month later or earlier, because there is no lack of liquidity anywhere. And the macroeconomic impact of the plans we have already seen. If you look at the spread between the countries of the south and of Germany, for example, you see that the spreads have been kept extremely small because of the expectation of the recovery plan to come in. So the macroeconomic impact has been delivered, and this is not a crisis management tool. The 30th of April is not a deadline. The 30th of April is an indication of the date by which the member states were expected to submit their plans. But actually, almost half of them will submit them later, and this is not a problem. Some of them a few weeks later, some of them significantly later, generally for domestic political reasons. And there is, again, absolutely no problem for that. We will not wait for the last plan coming in, because I saw a question in the chat, will not come for the last plan coming in to decide. We will decide on the plans as they come along. Can we do that quicker than the 2 months? Because we have 2 months, that was mentioned several times, to assess the plans. Honestly, 2 months is already crazy. The initial Commission proposal was leading to 4 months. All the checks that you all want us to perform to make sure that the reforms are the right one, that the milestones are credible, that the investments are genuine investment and not recycling of bad ideas, and that equality, for example, is properly mainstreamed throughout the plans, that the costing information is accurate, that the audit and control systems that the member states have are good, that none of the measure does significant harm to the environment and the climate, which is a fundamental requirement in the RF. If you want us to do all of this on 200 billion, honestly, we need 2 months. There might be 1 week maximum, I would say, of speedier assessment for those countries where we've had an extremely detailed dialogue before. And we have so we've discussed with all the member states since the last autumn, but with some of them we really have gone very far in narrowing out all the details of the plans. So for those, 2 months will be certainly fine, and we might even save a few days. But there are also plans where the work is not yet done, and as several of you highlighted, this is a massive endeavor to put these plans together. So it's no blame on the member states, honestly, if they, in the middle of the pandemic, have not been able to foresee reforms and investment for the next 5 years. It's completely normal and legitimate. So for those, we may need actually even a bit more time, because the information will not be complete, and because some more processing time will be needed. So it will be really a case by case, with 2 months as a normal period, but case by case depending on the status of the plan when we get it. Once we've done the hard work of assessment and have put together the detailed reasoning for the assessment, then the Council, in principle, will have 4 weeks to approve the plan and approve then the decision authorizing the plan. They can also decide to go quicker, because the work is actually done. They only have to look at what we have assessed and decide whether they like it or not. But the indication there is also 4 weeks. Then we will be able to start about paying, but paying will only come upon 2 additional requirements. The first one is a signature of the financing agreement with the member states. That's a legal commitment. That should be really a matter of days, no particular problem. But the second one is a ratification of the own resources decision by each and every member state in the EU. We have, I think, to date, 19 member states who have ratified, so we still have a few more outstanding. And what happens if one has not ratified, and we have approved already a number of plans? That simply we will not be able to borrow from the market the money that is needed to finance those plans. So we will wait for the ratification of the last decision before we can borrow the money. And once we've borrowed the money, then we will start paying the pre-financing of 13% to all the member states, which have an approved plan and financing agreement signed. So it's a few hurdles still to overcome, It's normal because we want the assessment to be robust, and it's no big drama because both the macroeconomic impact has taken place and there is no liquidity shortage in the EU. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm sure that was a helpful answer for many people listening and trying to get to the bottom of a lot of the comments in the press recently. Just something that you mentioned there, and indeed I wanted to touch upon, considering the title of the event, Towards Inclusive, Sustainable and Digital Transitions. Marco, I wonder if you wanted to comment on the gender inequality issue, in that I suppose there's the potential that, considering the green and digital focus of the recovery resilience plans, there is a potential risk of actually making gender inequalities worse, in that it kind of automatically leads to investments in the STEM subjects which women are already underrepresented in. So I wonder if you wanted to touch upon that and wider inequality issues.
Yes, of course. Let me first say one thing about the previous the things that have been said 2 moments ago on the timing. One is the issue that, for instance, we have seen that governments are delaying, are very late in the process. For instance, we have just learned that in Finland there are some issues going on with government. There's a risk to fall also there. We are afraid that this can delay the process. So I'm happy that what Madame Gauer was saying, reassuring that we do the best not to delay too much, because the more we delay the real expenditure of this money, the more will become difficult to recover and to create jobs, because we don't see a necessary connection between spending the money for investments and creating jobs. This is something that we have to work on, but it's really necessary to start this investment plan. In order, because the COVID impact, is true that the RRF is not for managing the crisis, but there are long-term impacts of the COVID-19 crisis on the economy. Tourism is one of the effects. Probably we will have to rebuild completely the sector, and the green and digital transition will give us a new tourism sector that will probably be quite different from the previous one. So I think there the RRF has a role to play, even in providing answers to immediate risks that we have today, the social risks. Among the social risks we have to address now, we have surely certain groups that are particularly at risk. I would not put women in specific groups, because women are half of our population. I cannot consider it a vulnerable group, as for instance we've seen for migrants. Migrants, the situation is tremendous, really. I don't see any attention to that on the national plans. But just to come back to the problem of women, we have gathered evidences enough to say that we have undone all the progresses achieved in 1 decade, I would say. I think the evidence we have tells very clearly there are cultural problems because the family charges were all on women. And this is, I can tell you that I reflect, especially in countries where we have seen with our eyes this cultural approach when we were lobbying for the work-life balance directive. We have seen how much difficulties is in our societies to understand that the family charges must be equally distributed internally to the family, internally to the households. But there are also all factors of discrimination that are re-emerging, and especially on the fact that many women are deciding not to participate anymore in the labor market because they have lost their jobs, because many of the sectors that have been strongly hit by the crisis were dominated by the presence of women on jobs. Here I would say that we regret a bit that the action plan for the social pillar arrived a bit late, and also the recommendation on active labor market policies arrived a bit late. I think from the few return I received from my affiliates, member states have not been able to redraft the social chapter of their national plans to adapt it to these two new elements. I don't know if Madame Gauer can probably have more detailed information. I only have a feedback from my members, but for instance, the necessity to introduce many of the results of the the options that are in these two documents is extremely important to address the gender dimension of the recovery. Active labor market policy cannot be only training. Training is crucial. I just want to remark that even in this period, women are normally the ones that achieve the best education performances. But when we go to occupational affairs and put them in the condition of learning, not only to be well educated, but to learn at work, participate in training, participating in adult training, there are huge gaps that persist, and this creates conditions for them to be fairly discriminated. I don't know how much space for, I agree, I understand the Commission has to look at 1 million things when they have to read the national plans, but at least try to give a look to that, at least to create the condition for the implementation, to try to have a special focus, because we are talking over half of the workforce. And if we don't if we don't bring them at work, there will be, I think women, then because I'm not a woman, but if we don't bring women at work, if we don't assure them a real participation on equal foot, on equal foot in the labor markets, we will have consequences in many other areas, including social protection, productivity, etc. So I think for us, we are very clear in our mind that this is one of our top priorities, and we will surely take this point seriously for the future use.
Can I come in just quickly on the gender dimension? I just very much agree with everything Markus said. Just a concrete example of how the transitions can exacerbate gender inequalities. Technological change. So occupations that require skills related to what we call STEM, so science, technology, engineering, and math. These are skills and education and careers that are mostly taken up by men. And as the labor market increasingly demands job profiles with these skills, we'll see that those who don't have those skills, so a majority of women will be left out of highly paying jobs, occupations that create more value added. So this is something that has to be taken into account when we design education, training policies, active labor market policies, as we said. So there has to be a targeted approach to the gender dimension. It's not enough to say we should invest, we should invest in education, in engineering, because we know that there is a bias in our society that will bring men to be more occupied in engineering jobs. So there has to be a targeted approach to say, yes, we increase education, for example, in engineering, but there has to be a targeted space and a support for women to be part of that support, because otherwise in the long term, we'll see exacerbation of these inequalities.
Thank you, Marta. Yeah, I was wondering, just more generally on the recovery plans. James, do you perceive that there could be a risk that the facility actually could undermine private sector investment, in that, just for instance, if governments are pushing on with the green projects to meet the criteria of the Commission have set, they're meeting their targets, are they then reducing the need for the private sector to actually reform and to act on these points? I mean, how do you mobilize private capital to contribute to this?
Yeah, well, thanks a lot. I think there's 2 points. I think firstly, in the types of instruments you use, it's good to work with the market, as I mentioned some before, working, for example, with the IB, where you get blending of finance, where where you'll use the IB funding to leverage further private investment. But you'd be quite right that does need to work alongside the private markets. I think there's also an issue on timing. At the moment, business investment is very, very low. There's a lack of business confidence, understandably. And I think Marta probably rightly referred to the funds essentially around structural financing, structural reform, investment for structural change. But I think it's also very important that we try and do as much of the investment as possible during the recovery phase. And I say in particular to take the place, if you like, of the low business investment that we're seeing at the moment. Similarly, I think unfortunately, we're going to see increasing insolvency numbers, increasing unemployment numbers as some of those emergency support schemes ease off as we get out of the crisis. So I think there will be macroeconomically, I think there is a need to pick up that slack. So I think it is important that the investments themselves start as quickly as possible. And I fully agree with Céline on this point. It's not about when the money arrives in the member state. Member states are liquid at the moment. As long as member states have got confidence that this scheme is going to go ahead, that ultimately all member states, if you like, will ratify the own resources decision, then they can go ahead with confidence and start making those investments and get paid back by the Commission later. But I think it is important that we get on, and this is why I mentioned shovel-ready projects. It is important that we get on and try and get some of these investment projects started now, so that we can pick up that macroeconomic slack.
Thank you. Just moving more towards the monitoring process now, okay, so we're at least towards the end of the drafting process, hopefully, and starting the proper assessment phase, but, moving on to the monitoring. I mean, I wonder, Céline, if you can give an indication, what happens if member states aren't implementing these reforms? I mean, the political repercussions of you cutting off the money are not small, but on the other hand, after the semester and struggles with getting CSRs implemented over the years, now you actually do have a bit of a stick to use here. So I mean, I don't know how the Commission will be approaching this sort of very tricky course in terms of monitoring.
Thank you very much. This will be essential. I think implementation of those plans will be equally a challenge as they're designed. I think what we are doing now, and we've been doing that for a while, is focusing with the member states on the design of proper milestones and targets for delivering the investments and the reforms that they have in their plans. So while in the first weeks of the work on the plan, it was very much about the consistent narrative of the packages of reform and investment, and having really the political direction or the policy direction better of the different plans. I think we have moved for quite some time now to the design and the drafting, the very precise drafting of those milestones and targets. And in a normal plan, you have roughly 200 of them. That are spread throughout the lifetime of the implementation of the facility, and we are having this very critical debate with the member states on how realistic are they, how properly drafted are they, to make sure that they will deliver on the objectives in a flexible and a realistic manner, and that this will all be measurable, because we also know that we have the Court of Auditor and the Parliament for very good reasons on our back, and we're actually quite happy about that. So what we expect then to see is twice a year the member states coming to seek payment under the facility, and demonstrating to us that they have met those milestones and targets. But it's not something that would only happen twice a year. I think it's a permanent dialogue, and we are also designing that already now with the member states. Permanent dialogue on the implementation, to have no surprise when comes the moment of a payment, and also to benefit from us, from the support that they need to implement both the reforms and investment. And here, the technical support instrument, that is also part of the overall framework, will play a key role. Member states have focused their demand for technical support from the Commission really on the implementation of the RRF. So we see this as very much a partnership with the member state. Then when comes the payment, if the milestone is not, or a target is not met, so the regulation is clear, no payment can be made. And it's not something that you can try and hide under a carpet or anything, because it's a legal obligation for us. We are accountable for that. It's proper spending of the EU budget. So there's no way we would put anything under the carpet. There is a possibility, of course, to have partial payment. If a significant share of the milestones and targets have been met and some not, but it doesn't mean that then the member states can forget about it, because they will have to catch up for the implementation of those elements that were not there. And then again, I expect, and then if you have really massive difficulties because the implementation of a given milestone can no longer take place for objective reasons, then of course that can all be renegotiated. And I think we will see a lot of adjustments of those milestones and targets as we go along, because no one can plan with absolute certainty what's going to happen in the next 5 years. So it's not. Also, we should de-dramatize that. It's a normal, will be a normal process. So in a nutshell, I think a lot of dialogue and a lot of cooperation. This is a joint endeavor. It was in the design of the plan, and it will continue in the implementation. And as hopefully liquidity situation will remain as it is for the moment, it's not going to be a matter of life or death or risk of losing access to the market every time. So we will have time to do the job properly, and that's really what we intend to do. Thank you.
Thank you. Marta, maybe you could comment in terms of the flexibility, what sort of flexibility is needed in the assessment of the targets, as Céline was commenting.
Thanks. Well, I'm actually very glad to hear what Céline has just said, because I also believe that planning today how exactly progress will happen over the next 5 years, it's impossible. And then there has to be some flexibility in the framework to be able to say, okay, circumstances has changed. Instead of 20, we'll do 15, and the next month we'll do the 5 more, or something like this. So there has to be some flexibility on that, and I'm actually very happy to hear indeed what Céline has just said, which confirms this wish, and very happy to hear that.
Just being aware that we're approaching the end of our allotted time, and I'm sure Céline has things to be getting on with at the end of this segment. I just wanted to maybe come to all of you really quite briefly for a sort of 1 minute, 2 minute answer. Just from your perspective, what the real risk of not meeting the objectives of the RRF will actually entail. Just from your own perspective, from where you're sitting. James, to start with you, perhaps.
Yeah, thanks for that. I think there's every chance at the end of this process. I think we'll be able to, or the Commission, let's say, will be able to tell a very positive story about how the money has been spent. But I think it is crucial, this point that we talked about before, that you raised, Laura, and it's also in the report. If we really want to sensibly look at the overall impact of this scheme, we do need to think about what's happening in the rest of the budgets. So I'm sure we'll hear the great stories about all the percentages that are to do with green and digital. But as I say, if you really want to do a thorough economic analysis, you do have to look at the overall picture.
Thank you. Sorry for springing that question on you. Marco, maybe next.
Okay. From our analysis, it appears clearly that the green objectives and the social objectives are not feeding each other. There is a trade-off still there. Our productive model, the way we produce, we consume, we work, means that the more we produce and work, the more we depart from the green objectives. It means that we have to go through a very deep transition. There are countries that are better placed, where this model has already changed the correlation, or is on the way to change the correlation. Some other countries are really far away from creating a positive correlation between sustainable growth, decent work, and the green agenda. So it means that we really have to make a huge effort to start the investments and to activate the objectives we have on the green side, but we really have to take the just transition issue extremely, because if we don't win the consensus of companies and workers, it's very difficult to make the change we want, and most of all, to make a job-rich recovery. We will continue to provide our contribution to the European Commission, to those that have to evaluate the plans and the implementations, so that we can provide our more instruments to those that have to evaluate and have this hard task. And our aims will be to provide elements on how the member states are doing in 3 areas: well-being of people, inclusiveness of the labor market, and vulnerability of workers, and then monitoring if we are really changing the relationship between the way we produce and how much impact we have on the environment. These are our commitments in these moments, and we will try to do this with our networks of members at national level. And I hope that this dialogue will continue to try to eliminate these risks, because we know that these risks are there. We will try to create instruments to mitigate the risk in order to avoid that this can materialize in a reality that we don't like, or we didn't want when we planned the RRF.
Thank you. Marta?
Thank you. Indeed, a very good question. I think the stakes are very high. And from the bigger picture is that for the first time, the EU borrowed jointly funding at this scale, and there has been a clear redistributive purpose, which is to help the most vulnerable countries. And this is a true European approach, and this, I believe, must be a success story for the future. Of course, implementation is crucial. We've mentioned it a lot. I think now what we have on paper looks good. But now I think the ball is really in the member states' court, and to demonstrate they can deliver and demonstrate that all this political effort to make this unprecedented instrument was not in vain, and that can deliver on the transition.
Thank you. And last word to you, Céline.
Thank you. I think to answer your question, I think it's important to define the objective. I think what is the objective of this fund? I fully subscribe to what Marta was saying. It's solidarity. It's a joint effort to recover together, and to accelerate the twin transition and make it an opportunity, also in a cohesive manner. I think this is what it is. But it's not other things. It's not to supplement existing EU programs delivering, for example, cross-border initiative. It is not the solution to all inequalities in the EU. It just takes those 2 examples, which are very, very valid examples and very, very valid objectives and things that we want to do. But the RF is not going to solve everything. What the RF has to do is to show solidarity and turn this crisis into an opportunity to embark on a twin transition, and to do that in a socially coherent and cohesive manner. So that's what it is. And if we fail, then we will have lost a huge opportunity. That's why we will not fail. We will manage. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, there was us thinking that the last 6 months have been hard work putting the plans together, but actually now the hard work properly begins as we start implementing some of these plans. And yeah, from the perspective of the EPC, we'll be following everything very closely. I'm sure others will be too, and we'll aim certainly to have more discussions like this one as the process goes forward. I'd just really like to thank everybody for participating, Céline especially, because I realize that your agenda must be quite crazy right now. And yeah, from us, we wish you all the luck with the assessment phase. So no, thank you very much for your participation, for your comments, and we'll see you again soon.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Goodbye.